It was a chilly evening in New York City, the kind where the streets buzzed with energy but also carried an undercurrent of unpredictability. Officer James Carter had been on duty for hours, cruising through neighborhoods in his patrol car, keeping an eye out for anything unusual. He was known among his colleagues as someone who trusted his gut, a quality that had helped him crack several tricky situations over the years. As he drove down a busy street, something caught his attention, a sleek black SUV speeding past other cars like it owned the road. The driver wasn't just breaking the speed limit, they were weaving aggressively through traffic, cutting off drivers and leaving honking horns in their wake. James frowned slightly. This wasn't just reckless driving, it felt intentional, almost urgent. Without hesitation, he flipped on his sirens and signaled for the vehicle to pull over. The SUV slowed down reluctantly and came to a stop by the curb. As James stepped out of his patrol car, flashlight in hand, he couldn't help but notice how luxurious the vehicle looked. It screamed wealth and status, the kind of car you'd expect to see parked outside a red carpet event. But what really grabbed his attention was the driver behind the wheel. When James approached the window and shone his light inside, he immediately recognized the face staring back at him. It was none other than P. Diddy, the global music icon, entrepreneur, and household name. For a split second, James felt a twinge of awe. Growing up, he'd heard countless hits from the man sitting right in front of him. But this wasn't fan hour. It was police work. James quickly composed himself and focused on the task at hand. "Good evening, sir," James said calmly, trying to keep his tone professional despite the surreal situation. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" P. Diddy offered a sheepish smile, leaning slightly toward the window. "Hey, officer. Look, I apologize if I was going too fast. I didn't mean any harm." James nodded slowly, jotting down the plate number while glancing into the car. That's when he noticed her, a young girl sitting quietly in the passenger seat. She couldn't have been more than 10 or 11 years old, dressed in casual clothes that seemed mismatched with the extravagance of the SUV she was riding in. Her hair was tied back neatly, but there was something about her posture, rigid, almost frozen, that made James pause. He leaned closer, shining his flashlight gently toward the girl. "Who's this?" he asked, gesturing toward her. P. Diddy followed his gaze and chuckled lightly, waving a dismissive hand. "Oh, she's my goddaughter. We were at a family thing earlier and now I'm taking her home to her mom." James raised an eyebrow. Something about the explanation didn't sit right with him. Most kids would be curious or even excited to meet a police officer during such a high-profile encounter. Instead, this little girl sat perfectly still, avoiding eye contact entirely. Her hands were clasped tightly together, and she seemed completely disconnected from the conversation happening around her. "Does she talk much?" James asked casually, though his mind was racing with questions. P. Diddy shrugged, still smiling, but noticeably less relaxed now. "She's shy, you know. Kids these days, they're always glued to their phones or lost in their own worlds." James nodded again, pretending to buy the explanation, but his instincts were screaming louder than ever. There was something off here, something he couldn't quite put his finger on yet. He decided to dig a little deeper before making any assumptions. After all, he reminded himself, appearances can be deceiving, but so can silence. And this girl's silence spoke volumes. With a polite nod, James excused himself momentarily and stepped away from the car. Standing near his patrol vehicle, he called dispatch to run a quick background check on both P. Diddy and the girl. While waiting for the results, he kept glancing back at the SUV. The girl hadn't moved an inch. She continued to stare straight ahead, her expression blank as though she were miles away from the scene unfolding around her. When the report finally came through, it showed nothing alarming, at least on paper. No outstanding warrants, no criminal records associated with either individual. Everything appeared clean and above board. Yet James couldn't shake the nagging feeling in his gut. Something wasn't adding up. Taking a deep breath, he walked back to the SUV, determined to get answers one way or another. Little did he know, this seemingly routine traffic stop was about to take a turn that would change everything, for him, for the girl, and perhaps even for P. Diddy himself. James stood by the SUV, his mind racing with questions. The girl's silence was gnawing at him, and no matter how hard he tried to convince himself it was nothing, his instincts wouldn't let go. He decided to try a different approach, one that might break through the wall of quietness surrounding her. "Hey there," James said softly, bending down so he could speak directly to the girl. His voice was calm and warm, the kind meant to reassure rather than intimidate. "What's your name?" For a long moment, she didn't respond. Her hands stayed clasped tightly in her lap, and her eyes remained fixed on the dashboard. But then, almost imperceptibly, she glanced up at him. It was fleeting, but in that brief moment James saw something, a flicker of fear mixed with hesitation. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she whispered, "Lila." Her voice was barely audible, trembling slightly as if every word cost her effort. James smiled gently, trying not to overwhelm her. "Nice to meet you, Lila. Are you okay? Do you want to tell me anything?" Before she could answer or even process the question, P. Diddy interjected smoothly, leaning across the center console. "She's just tired, officer. Long day, you know how kids are." His tone was casual, almost dismissive, but James noticed the subtle shift in his demeanor. P. Diddy's earlier charm had faded slightly, replaced by a hint of defensiveness. James straightened up, studying both of them carefully. Something about the dynamic between the two didn't feel right. A grown man claiming to be her godfather, yet unable to explain why she seemed so withdrawn. It didn't add up. And while James couldn't accuse anyone based on gut feelings alone, he knew he needed to dig deeper. "Mind if I take a look inside the car?" James asked, keeping his tone neutral. "Just standard procedure when we pull someone over for speeding." P. Diddy hesitated for a fraction of a second before nodding. "Sure thing, officer. Knock yourself out." James grabbed his flashlight and began inspecting the interior of the SUV. At first glance, everything seemed normal. The seats were pristine, the dashboard gleamed under the streetlights, and there were no obvious signs of trouble. But as he moved closer to the passenger side, something caught his eye. A small backpack wedged partially under the seat. He pulled it out cautiously, turning it over in his hands. It was plain and unassuming, the kind of bag any kid might carry to school. Still, something about its placement, hidden away under the seat, raised his suspicion. "Does this belong to you, Lila?" James asked, holding it up for her to see. Her reaction confirmed his hunch. She flinched visibly, her body tensing as though bracing for impact. P. Diddy, sensing the tension, quickly chimed in. "Oh, that's hers, yeah. Just some toys and stuff. Kids always leave their things lying around, right?" Ignoring him, James unzipped the backpack slowly. Inside, he found a jumble of items, a few notebooks, some pencils, and a crumpled piece of paper. He picked up one of the notebooks and flipped it open. Page after page was filled with drawings, some colorful, others dark and chaotic. One particular sketch stood out. A stick figure surrounded by jagged lines and storm clouds with the words, "Help me," scrawled boldly across the top. James's stomach tightened. This wasn't just a child's doodle. It was a cry for help. He glanced at P. Diddy, who was watching him intently now, his earlier confidence wavering. "Care to explain this?" James asked, holding up the notebook. P. Diddy forced a laugh, though it sounded hollow. "Kids draw weird stuff all the time, officer. You can't read too much into it." But James wasn't buying it anymore. He turned back to Lila, kneeling beside the car once again. "Lila," he said gently, "is this yours? Did you write 'help me'?" Tears welled up in her eyes, spilling silently down her cheeks. She nodded faintly, her chin quivering. That single gesture told James everything he needed to know. Whatever was going on here, it wasn't innocent, and it certainly wasn't okay. With a deep breath, James stepped back from the car and called for backup. He explained the situation briefly, emphasizing the need for social services to get involved. Within minutes, additional officers arrived, along with representatives from Child Protective Services. The mood shifted dramatically as the scene became more formal, the gravity of the situation sinking in. While they waited, James kept his focus on Lila. He wanted her to know she wasn't alone, that someone was listening even if she hadn't been able to speak up until now. "You're safe here," he murmured quietly. "We're going to figure this out together." For the first time that night, Lila met his gaze directly. There was still fear in her eyes, but also a glimmer of hope, something James hadn't seen before. As the authorities took over, preparing to question both her and P. Diddy further, James couldn't help but feel a surge of determination. This wasn't just another case, it was a chance to make a real difference in someone's life. And as the events unfolded, one thing became clear. Trusting his instincts had led him exactly where he needed to be, to a young girl who desperately needed someone to hear her silent plea for help. As the backup officers and social workers arrived on the scene, the atmosphere shifted noticeably. What had started as a routine traffic stop was now evolving into something far more serious. The flashing lights from multiple police cars cast an eerie glow over the street, drawing curious glances from passers-by who slowed down to catch a glimpse of what was happening. For Lila, sitting silently in the passenger seat, it must have felt like the world was closing in around her. James stepped aside momentarily, briefing the newly arrived team about the situation. He handed over the notebook with the troubling drawings and explained how Lila had reacted when he showed her the "Help me" message. The social worker, a kind-faced woman with years of experience, nodded thoughtfully, her expression growing increasingly concerned. "We'll need to speak with her separately," she said firmly. "It's important we give her space to open up without feeling pressured." James agreed wholeheartedly. He knew that forcing Lila to talk in front of P. Diddy could shut her down completely. If they wanted answers, they needed to handle this carefully. Meanwhile, P. Diddy seemed to sense the tide turning against him. His earlier charm had all but evaporated, replaced by visible frustration. He raised his voice slightly, addressing the group of officers and social workers. "Look, I don't know what you think is going on here, but this is ridiculous. She's my goddaughter. I'm just taking her home. You're blowing this way out of proportion." One of the senior officers stepped forward, his tone firm but respectful. "Sir, we understand your position, but given the circumstances, we have to investigate further. We're not accusing you of anything yet, but we do need to ensure the child's safety. That's our priority." P. Diddy clenched his jaw, but didn't argue further. Instead, he crossed his arms and leaned back against the SUV, watching as the social worker approached Lila cautiously. Kneeling beside the car, the woman introduced herself with a soft smile. "Hi there, sweetie. My name's Lisa. Can we go somewhere quiet so we can chat for a bit?" Lila hesitated, glancing nervously at P. Diddy before looking back at Lisa. It was clear she was torn between fear and uncertainty. After a long pause, she finally nodded, though her movements were small and hesitant. Lisa opened the car door gently and extended her hand, giving Lila the option to take it. When the girl slipped her tiny fingers into Lisa's palm, it was a moment of quiet triumph, a sign that trust was beginning to form. They walked a short distance away, settling onto a nearby bench under the dim glow of a street lamp. James watched, from afar, ensuring Lila felt safe while still respecting her privacy. He couldn't hear their conversation, but he could see the way Lisa spoke softly, leaning in close and nodding encouragingly whenever Lila whispered something. It was painstaking work, unraveling the layers of fear and silence that had built up over time. Back at the SUV, the officers continued questioning P. Diddy. They asked him basic details. How long had he known Lila? Where exactly was he taking her? Who was her mother? And could they confirm her identity? To his credit, P. Diddy answered most questions confidently, though there were moments when his answers seemed vague or inconsistent. When pressed for specifics about Lila's family, he grew visibly agitated. "I told you already I'm doing a favor for a friend," he insisted. "Her mom is out of town, and she asked me to look after Lila for a few days. I don't see why this is such a big deal." But inconsistencies began to pile up. For one, P. Diddy couldn't provide concrete information about where Lila's mother lived or how he planned to reach her. He claimed to be following instructions but couldn't produce any texts, emails, or phone calls to back up his story. Each unanswered question only deepened the suspicion hanging over him. While the investigation unfolded, James found himself reflecting on the weight of the situation. He'd been in law enforcement long enough to recognize patterns, signs that something wasn't right. Lila's withdrawn behavior, the hidden backpack, the desperate plea for help scrawled in a child's handwriting, it all pointed to a much darker reality than anyone had anticipated. Hours passed as the team worked tirelessly to piece together the puzzle. Eventually, Lisa returned to the group, her expression grave. She pulled James aside and spoke quietly. She confirmed that she isn't his goddaughter, Lisa revealed. In fact, she says she barely knows him. He picked her up earlier today and told her he was bringing her to meet her mom, but she doesn't even know where her mom is right now. James felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't just a case of negligence, it was deception. And if Lila's account was accurate, then P. Diddy had deliberately misled authorities about their relationship. But the story didn't end there. According to Lisa, Lila had also hinted at being subjected to emotional manipulation and neglect during her time with him. While she hadn't gone into detail, the trauma was evident in the way she described feeling trapped and powerless. Armed with this new information, the officers decided to take P. Diddy into custody, not for any crime, yet proven, but for further questioning. As they led him to a patrol car, he protested loudly, insisting he was innocent and accusing them of harassment. But his words carried little weight now. The evidence, and Lila's courage, spoke louder than anything he could say. For Lila, the night wasn't over. Social services arranged for her to stay in temporary protective care until they could locate her real family and verify her living situation. Before leaving the scene, Lisa knelt beside her one last time. "You did the right thing tonight," she said gently. "You're safe now, okay? We're going to make sure nothing bad happens to you." Lila nodded, tears streaming down her face once again, but this time they weren't tears of fear. They were tears of relief. For the first time in what might have been weeks or even months, she allowed herself to believe that someone truly cared about her. As James packed up his gear and prepared to leave the scene, he glanced back at Lila one final time. Her small figure sat huddled in the back seat of a social worker's car, clutching a blanket tightly around her shoulders. Despite everything she'd been through, there was a faint spark of hope in her eyes, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, resilience can shine through. This was more than just another day on the job for James. It was a stark reminder of why he wore the badge, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. And as he drove away from the scene, he knew one thing. For certain, the events of this night would stay with him forever. The next morning, news of the incident began to spread like wildfire. By sunrise, reporters were camped outside the police station, microphones in hand, eager to uncover every detail of what had happened the night before. The story was irresistible. Global superstar pulled over for speeding, only for authorities to discover something far more troubling involving a young girl. It wasn't just gossip. It was a potential scandal that touched on issues of power, privilege, and child welfare. For James, the sudden media frenzy was overwhelming. He hadn't expected his routine patrol to turn into front-page headlines. As he walked into the precinct early that day, cameras flashed, and journalists shouted questions at him from behind barricades. "Officer, can you confirm if P. Diddy is being charged?" one reporter called out. Another chimed in, "What exactly did you find in that backpack?" James kept his head down, avoiding eye contact as he pushed through the crowd. He didn't have answers for them. Not yet, anyway. All he knew was that Lila's safety came first, and anything beyond that would unfold according to the law. Inside the station, things were chaotic but focused. Detectives huddled around tables, poring over evidence and piecing together timelines. Every detail mattered now. Every word spoken, every inconsistency flagged. Meanwhile, P. Diddy sat in an interrogation room, his usual swagger replaced by frustration and defiance. His lawyers had arrived within hours of his detention, arguing vehemently that their client was innocent and being unfairly targeted because of his fame. They demanded explanations, threatened lawsuits, and tried to spin the narrative in his favor. But no amount of legal posturing could erase the fact that Lila had been found sitting silently in his car, clutching a backpack filled with alarming clues. Back in protective custody, Lila was beginning to settle into her temporary surroundings. She'd been placed in a safe house run by social services, where trained counselors worked tirelessly to help her feel comfortable. At first, she remained withdrawn, speaking only when absolutely necessary. But slowly, she started opening up, not just about the events of the previous night, but about the days leading up to it. Through gentle conversations and careful questioning, the full picture began to emerge. Lila revealed that she had been living with her mother until recently, when her mom disappeared without explanation. Neighbors told her that her mom had gone away for work, but weeks passed with no phone calls or visits. Then, one afternoon, P. Diddy showed up at her doorstep, claiming he was a friend of her mother's and promising to take her somewhere safe. Desperate and confused, Lila trusted him, at least at first. But once they left her neighborhood, things changed. P. Diddy rarely spoke to her, except to give vague instructions or scold her for asking too many questions. He moved her from place to place, never staying anywhere long enough for her to feel secure. When she asked about her mom, he brushed her off, saying she'd see her soon. Days turned into nights, and Lila grew increasingly anxious, unsure of who to trust or where she was headed. Her drawings, the ones James had discovered in the backpack, were her way of coping. Each sketch told a story: dark clouds representing uncertainty, jagged lines symbolizing fear, and those two words, "help me," screaming louder than any voice ever could. For Lila, art became her lifeline, a silent cry for someone to notice the pain she couldn't put into words. As the detectives listened to her account, they realized the complexity of the situation. This wasn't a straightforward case of kidnapping or abuse. It was something murkier, involving manipulation and exploitation. P. Diddy hadn't physically harmed her, but he had used her vulnerability to control her, keeping her isolated and dependent on him. Whether his intentions were malicious or simply careless, the impact on Lila was undeniable. By midday, the investigation had expanded significantly. Authorities reached out to Lila's mother, tracking her down through old contacts and social media accounts. To everyone's relief, she was alive but deeply troubled. She admitted to leaving Lila temporarily while she dealt with personal issues, unaware that P. Diddy had stepped in and taken her daughter under false pretenses. Her voice cracked with guilt as she spoke to investigators over the phone. "I thought I was doing the right thing," she said tearfully. "I trusted him. I never imagined." Hearing her words, even secondhand, broke James's heart. He couldn't imagine the weight of knowing your child had been caught in such a dangerous situation, all because of misplaced trust. Still, finding Lila's mom was a crucial step forward. Social services arranged for her to reunite with her daughter as soon as possible, under strict supervision to ensure both their safety. While the team worked tirelessly to resolve the case, public opinion swirled unpredictably. Some people rallied behind Lila, praising James and his colleagues for stepping in when it mattered most. Others defended P. Diddy, accusing the police of overreacting and exploiting his celebrity status. Social media exploded with hashtags, debates, and armchair analyses, each side digging in deeper as new details emerged. Through it all, James stayed grounded. He reminded himself why he joined the force in the first place: to serve and protect. Fame didn't matter here. Justice did. And justice meant ensuring that Lila, and others like her, would never have to endure such fear and uncertainty again. That evening, as he drove home after another long shift, James reflected on everything that had transpired. The case was far from closed, but progress had been made. Lila was safe. Her mom was on her way back into her life, and the truth was finally coming to light. As he parked his car and stepped out into the cool night air, James felt a rare sense of satisfaction. In a world full of chaos and noise, he'd managed to make a difference, one small human moment at a time. The days following the incident felt like a whirlwind for everyone involved. For Lila, adjusting to her new reality was both overwhelming and liberating. She had spent so much time trapped in confusion and fear that the sudden influx of care and attention felt almost surreal. Social workers visited her daily, bringing toys, books, and warm meals. Counselors encouraged her to express herself through drawings or conversations, whatever made her feel comfortable. Slowly but surely, she began to let her guard down. Her mother's arrival marked a turning point. When they finally reunited, it was an emotional scene. Lila ran into her arms, sobbing uncontrollably as if releasing all the pent-up emotions she'd been carrying for weeks. Her mom held her tightly, tears streaming down her own face. "I'm so sorry," she whispered over and over again. "I didn't know this would happen. I promise I'll never leave you like that again." It wasn't just empty reassurance. Social services ensured that Lila's mom received support to help stabilize their lives. They connected her with counseling resources and financial assistance programs, recognizing that her struggles had played a role in the situation. The goal was clear: break the cycle of instability that had put Lila at risk in the first place. Meanwhile, P. Diddy remained under intense scrutiny. While he hadn't been formally charged with any crime yet, the court of public opinion was relentless. His lawyers worked overtime to manage the narrative, issuing statements claiming he was being unfairly targeted because of his celebrity status. "This is a misunderstanding," one press release read. "Our client has always prioritized the well-being of children and families. He acted out of kindness, not malice." But the public wasn't convinced. People were quick to point out inconsistencies in his story. Why hadn't he contacted Lila's mother directly? Why had he moved her around so frequently without explanation? And most importantly, why had Lila been carrying a backpack filled with desperate pleas for help? As the investigation continued, more details surfaced. Detectives discovered that P. Diddy had taken Lila to multiple locations during the week she was in his care, including luxury hotels and private residences. At each stop, he seemed to prioritize his own schedule over her needs. Witnesses reported seeing him hosting parties while Lila stayed quietly in another room, seemingly forgotten. It painted a troubling picture of neglect disguised as generosity. James found himself caught in the middle of it all. Reporters hounded him for updates on the case, while colleagues praised him for trusting his instincts when others might have let it slide. But James didn't feel like a hero. To him, this wasn't about accolades, it was about doing what was right. Every time he thought about Lila sitting silently in that SUV, clutching her backpack like it was her only lifeline, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. One afternoon, while reviewing evidence at the precinct, James received an unexpected visitor. It was Lisa, the social worker who had been working closely with Lila since the night of the traffic stop. She approached him with a warm smile, holding a small envelope in her hand. "I wanted to give you something," she said softly. "From Lila." Curious, James opened the envelope to find a simple drawing inside. It depicted two figures standing side by side, one tall and uniformed, the other small and smiling. Above them, bold letters spelled out the words, "Thank you." James stared at it for a long moment, feeling a lump rise in his throat. "She asked me to deliver it personally," Lisa explained. "She said she wanted you to know how much your actions meant to her. You gave her hope when she needed it most." James nodded, touched by the gesture. "Tell her I'm glad I could help," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "And tell her she's stronger than she thinks. She's going to be okay." Lisa smiled knowingly. "She already is, thanks to people like you." As the case moved closer to resolution, legal proceedings loomed large. Prosecutors debated whether there was enough evidence to charge P. Diddy with endangerment or other related offenses. While nothing definitive had emerged yet, the pressure mounted as more witnesses came forward with stories of questionable behavior involving him and other vulnerable individuals. The spotlight was unrelenting, forcing him to retreat from public life temporarily. For Lila and her mom, however, the focus shifted toward healing. They attended family therapy sessions together, learning how to rebuild trust and communicate openly. It wasn't easy. There were moments of frustration and setbacks, but they were determined to make it work. Social workers checked in regularly, offering guidance and encouragement along the way. Back at the precinct, James returned to his usual duties, though the memory of that fateful night lingered. He often thought about Lila and wondered how she was doing. Occasionally, Lisa would call with updates, sharing snippets of her progress. "She's thriving," Lisa told him once. "She even started school again. The teachers say she's bright and curious, just the kind of kid who deserves a second chance." Those words stayed with James, reminding him why he wore the badge. In a world where justice sometimes felt elusive, moments like these reaffirmed his belief in the power of compassion and perseverance. A simple traffic stop had turned into something far greater, an opportunity to change a life for the better, and, as he drove through the streets of New York City, lights flashing and sirens silent, James knew one thing for certain. No matter how routine a call might seem, it could always lead to something extraordinary. Weeks turned into months, and life began to take on a semblance of normalcy for Lila and her mom. The initial chaos of the investigation had settled into quieter, more structured days, filled with routines designed to help them heal. Lila returned to school, where she quickly became known for her artistic talent. Her drawings, once filled with dark clouds and jagged lines, now featured bright colors and smiling faces. Teachers marveled at her resilience, noting how she seemed to carry herself with newfound confidence. Her mom, too, was making strides. With the support of counselors and community programs, she worked hard to address the personal struggles that had led to her absence in the first place. She found a steady job and secured stable housing, determined to create a safe environment for her daughter. Their apartment, though modest, was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the uncertainty they'd endured before. Photos of Lila adorned the walls, alongside colorful artwork she proudly displayed as proof of her progress. Meanwhile, P. Diddy's legal troubles continued to unfold. Though no formal charges were filed against him, the court of public opinion remained unforgiving. His reputation took a significant hit as allegations of negligence and exploitation swirled around him. High-profile figures who had once praised his philanthropy now distanced themselves, and sponsors began pulling out of partnerships. For someone accustomed to adoration and success, the backlash was humbling and relentless. Despite the lack of criminal charges, civil lawsuits soon emerged. Families claiming similar experiences with P. Diddy stepped forward, alleging patterns of behavior that prioritized convenience over care. These cases added fuel to the fire, keeping him in the headlines and under intense scrutiny. His lawyers fought fiercely to defend him, but the damage was done. The image of a benevolent celebrity using his wealth for good had been replaced by questions about accountability and responsibility. For James, watching the fallout from afar was both satisfying and sobering. On one hand, he felt vindicated knowing that his instincts had uncovered something important, something that might prevent others from falling into similar situations. On the other hand, he couldn't ignore the broader implications of the case. It wasn't just about one man or one child. It was about exposing systemic issues that allowed such scenarios to happen in the first place. James often thought about the role fame played in all of this. If P. Diddy hadn't been a global icon, would authorities have acted as swiftly? Would the media have paid as much attention? These questions weighed heavily on him, prompting discussions with colleagues about how privilege could cloud judgment, even unintentionally. He resolved to remain vigilant, ensuring that every call he responded to received the same level of care and attention, regardless of who was involved. One evening, after a long shift, James attended a community meeting hosted by local advocacy groups. The event focused on child welfare and protection, drawing attendees from various walks of life. Parents, educators, social workers, and law enforcement officers gathered to share stories and brainstorm solutions. When James was invited to speak, he hesitated at first, unsure of what to say. But as he stood before the crowd, he realized the importance of sharing Lila's story, not for sensationalism, but as a reminder of why vigilance matters. I didn't think much of it when I pulled over that car, James began, his voice steady but heartfelt. It was just another traffic stop, or so I thought. But sometimes, the smallest moments can lead to the biggest changes. That little girl sitting silently in the passenger seat reminded me why I do this job. She reminded me that behind every face, there's a story waiting to be heard. His words resonated deeply with the audience, sparking applause and nods of agreement. Afterward, several people approached him to thank him for his honesty and dedication. One woman, a mother of 2 young children, hugged him tightly, tears streaming down her face. "You saved that little girl," she said, "and because of you, maybe my kids will grow up in a world where people like you are always watching out for them." The encounter left James humbled and inspired. It reinforced his belief that even the simplest actions, like stopping a speeding SUV, could ripple outward, affecting lives in ways he might never fully understand. He returned home that night feeling reinvigorated, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As time went on, Lila occasionally sent James updates through Lisa, her social worker. Each note was accompanied by a new drawing, showcasing her growth and creativity. In one picture, she depicted herself standing tall beside her mom, surrounded by sunshine and flowers. Beneath it, she wrote, "We're happy now." Reading those words brought tears to James's eyes. It was proof that healing was possible, that even in the darkest moments, light could find its way through. Back at the precinct, James became an advocate for better training and resources related to child welfare. He pushed for workshops and seminars aimed at helping officers recognize signs of neglect or abuse, emphasizing the importance of trusting their instincts. His efforts earned him respect among his peers, many of whom credited him with raising awareness about issues that often went unnoticed. In the end, the case of the little girl in the SUV became more than just a headline. It became a catalyst for change. For Lila, it meant finding safety and stability after months of fear and confusion. For her mom, it meant a second chance to rebuild their relationship and provide the love and care her daughter deserved. And for James, it meant reaffirming his commitment to protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. Life moved forward, as it always does. But for everyone touched by that fateful night, nothing would ever be quite the same again. Months passed, and the ripple effects of that pivotal night continued to shape lives in unexpected ways. For Lila, the transformation was remarkable. She had gone from a quiet, withdrawn child who barely spoke to a vibrant presence in her classroom, eager to participate and share her thoughts. Her teachers noticed how her confidence grew with each passing week. During art class, she became the go-to expert, guiding classmates on shading techniques or color combinations. Her drawings, once filled with dark clouds and jagged lines, now told stories of hope. A sunny park where kids played freely, a cozy home surrounded by flowers, and even a portrait of a police officer standing tall under a starry sky. Her mom often marveled at the change. "It's like I've got my little girl back," she'd say during check-ins with Lisa, the social worker. The two women had formed a close bond over the months, meeting regularly to discuss progress and challenges. While there were still tough days, moments when old fears resurfaced, they tackled them together, leaning on the support systems they'd built around them. Slowly but surely, their family began to feel whole again. For James, seeing Lila thrive was its own reward. Every drawing she sent him served as a reminder of why he chose this line of work. But beyond the personal satisfaction, the case had sparked something larger within him. A drive to ensure no child slipped through the cracks unnoticed. He started volunteering at community centers, giving talks about recognizing signs of distress in children. His message was simple: trust your gut. If something feels off, investigate further. You might just save someone's life. These efforts didn't go unnoticed. Local newspapers began profiling James, not because he sought attention, but because others recognized the impact he was having. One article highlighted his role in Lila's rescue, quoting neighbors, colleagues, and even strangers who had been inspired by his actions. He didn't just do his job. He cared enough to look deeper, one neighbor said. Another piece focused on how his advocacy was pushing for systemic changes within law enforcement, encouraging officers to prioritize compassion alongside protocol. While James embraced these developments humbly, P. Diddy's situation remained complicated. Though no criminal charges stuck, the civil lawsuits dragged on, casting a shadow over his career. Public appearances became rare, and when he did speak, it was usually through carefully crafted statements issued by his PR team. Behind closed doors, sources claimed he was struggling to come to terms with the fallout. Friends described him as frustrated and defensive, convinced that his intentions had been misunderstood. But public sympathy waned as more stories emerged. Other families stepped forward, sharing accounts of times when they felt let down by his promises of help. These testimonies painted a pattern: grand gestures followed by neglect, leaving vulnerable individuals feeling abandoned. While none of these cases amounted to criminal wrongdoing, they eroded trust in his character and tarnished his legacy. The media frenzy eventually died down, replaced by quieter conversations about accountability and responsibility. Talk shows debated whether celebrities should face stricter scrutiny when taking on roles traditionally handled by professionals, like fostering or mentoring vulnerable youth. Opinion pieces explored the dangers of assuming wealth equated to competence in matters of care. The narrative shifted from focusing solely on P. Diddy to examining broader societal issues, how systems designed to protect could fail when overshadowed by power and privilege. Back in Lila's world, life moved forward steadily. She celebrated milestones big and small, acing a spelling test, making a new friend at school, planting flowers in the garden with her mom. Each achievement was a testament to her resilience and the support she received along the way. On weekends, she attended art classes offered by a local nonprofit, where instructors praised her talent and encouraged her dreams of becoming an illustrator someday. One Saturday morning, Lisa surprised Lila with tickets to a community art exhibit featuring works by young artists. As they walked through the gallery, admiring colorful paintings and intricate sculptures, Lila stopped suddenly in front of one display. It was a mural created collaboratively by children who had overcome adversity, a swirling mix of bright hues and bold shapes symbolizing strength and renewal. At the bottom corner, someone had scrawled a familiar phrase, "Help me." But instead of despair, the words radiated defiance, surrounded by rays of golden light. Tears welled up in Lila's eyes as she stared at the mural. Without hesitation, she grabbed a marker from the nearby activity station and added her own contribution, a tiny figure holding hands with another labeled, "Thank you." When Lisa asked what it meant, Lila smiled shyly. "That's me and Officer James. He helped me find my voice." Word of the mural spread quickly, catching the attention of local news outlets. Reporters interviewed participants, highlighting their stories of triumph over hardship. Lila, though initially hesitant, agreed to share hers. Sitting beside Lisa and clutching a sketch pad, she spoke softly but confidently. "I used to be scared all the time," she admitted. "But now I know people care about me, and if anyone else is scared, I want them to know they're not alone." Her words resonated deeply, striking a chord with viewers across the city. Calls poured into social service hotlines, with concerned citizens reporting potential cases of neglect or abuse. Community organizations saw an uptick in donations and volunteer signups inspired by Lila's courage. What had started as a single act of bravery on a lonely night had blossomed into a movement. A call to action for everyone to pay closer attention to the silent cries for help happening right under their noses. As the sun set on that unforgettable day, James sat in his patrol car reflecting on everything that had transpired. He thought about Lila, her mom, and all the other families touched by the events of that fateful evening. He thought about the lessons learned, not just by him, but by society as a whole. Most importantly, he thought about the future, knowing that while challenges would always exist, so too would opportunities to make a difference. And as he drove off into the night, blue lights flashing silently, James reminded himself of the truth he'd come to embrace. Sometimes the smallest moments lead to the biggest changes. As the months rolled on, The story of Lila and that fateful night became more than just a memory. It became a symbol of resilience, courage, and the power of small actions to spark big changes. For James, it wasn't just about the case anymore. It was about the ripple effect it had created in his life and the lives of others. Every day he carried the lessons he'd learned with him, reminding himself to stay alert, stay compassionate, and never underestimate the impact of listening. One crisp autumn morning, James received an invitation to speak at a statewide conference for law enforcement officers. The theme was protecting the vulnerable, and organizers specifically requested that he share Lila's story, not as a cautionary tale, but as an example of how trust and instinct could lead to meaningful outcomes. At first, James hesitated. He didn't consider himself a public speaker, and he worried about stepping into the spotlight. But Lisa encouraged him, saying, "Your voice matters, James. People need to hear this." When the day arrived, James stood nervously behind the podium, scanning the room filled with uniformed officers, social workers, and community leaders. He took a deep breath and began, speaking from the heart. "I didn't set out to change anything that night," he admitted. "I was just doing my job. But sometimes doing your job means looking beyond the surface, listening when no one else is, asking questions even when they're hard, and trusting your gut when something feels wrong." He went on to describe the traffic stop, the silent girl in the passenger seat, and the backpack filled with drawings that spoke louder than words. As he recounted the details, the audience listened intently, hanging on to every word. When he finished, the room erupted in applause, not because he had solved some grand mystery, but because his story resonated deeply. It reminded them why they wore their badges, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Afterward, dozens of attendees approached James, sharing their own experiences and thanking him for inspiring them to be more vigilant. One officer told him about a recent call where a child's hesitation during questioning led to uncovering hidden neglect at home. Another recounted how James's talk motivated her to push harder for better training programs in her department. These conversations reinforced what James already knew. Change starts with awareness, and awareness spreads through shared stories. Meanwhile, Lila continued to thrive, blossoming into a confident and creative young girl. She loved school, made friends easily, and poured her energy into art projects that reflected her newfound joy. Her mom often joked that their apartment walls were running out of space to display all her masterpieces. Together, they built routines that brought stability and happiness: Sunday pancake breakfasts, evening walks around the neighborhood, and bedtime stories that always ended with laughter. But Lila never forgot where she came from. In fact, she used her experiences to fuel her passion for helping others. With Lisa's encouragement, she started volunteering at a local shelter for kids in foster care, teaching art classes, and offering words of encouragement. "You can get through anything," she'd tell them earnestly. "Just keep drawing, keep dreaming, and don't give up." Her efforts caught the attention of a children's advocacy group, which invited her to participate in a campaign promoting awareness about child welfare. Posters featuring her artwork appeared across the city, accompanied by messages like, "Every child deserves to feel safe," and "Help us protect tomorrow's future." Seeing her work displayed so prominently filled Lila with pride, not for herself but for the cause she believed in. For P. Diddy, life remained a mix of challenges and reflection. Though legal proceedings eventually concluded without major consequences, the damage to his reputation lingered. He retreated from the public eye, focusing instead on rebuilding trust within his inner circle. Some speculated whether he truly understood the gravity of his actions, while others argued that the backlash overshadowed any good intentions he may have had. Regardless of opinions, one thing was clear. The case forced society to confront uncomfortable truths about privilege, responsibility, and accountability. Conversations sparked by Lila's story extended far beyond headlines, prompting reforms in child protection policies and fostering greater collaboration between law enforcement and social services. Communities rallied together, determined to ensure that no child would ever feel invisible again. Years later, James found himself driving past the same stretch of road where it all began. The memory of that chilly evening came flooding back. The speeding SUV, the quiet girl clutching her backpack, the sense of unease that refused to fade until justice prevailed. He smiled softly, realizing how much had changed since then, not just in the world but within himself. That night, as he sat down to write in his journal, he jotted down a single sentence. Sometimes, the smallest moments remind us why we do what we do. It was true. His encounter with Lila hadn't just saved her. It had reignited his purpose, strengthened his resolve, and inspired countless others to follow suit. And somewhere across town, Lila tucked herself into bed, clutching her favorite sketchpad close. Before drifting off to sleep, she flipped through its pages, pausing at a drawing of two figures standing side by side, one tall and uniformed, the other small and smiling. Above them, bold letters spelled out the words, "Thank you." Though she didn't say it aloud, she thought it silently, sending gratitude into the universe for the man who had listened when the rest of the world looked away.